Welcome, everyone. Really, we thank you for being here. Greetings, and thank you for coming to this event.
Yeah, it really is lovely to see some friendly faces again, some new faces too, and to be together, even virtually. So again, welcome. Welcome to our presentation.
Susanne and I are often asking ourselves the question, are we doing enough about climate change?
So we decided to take this on by using every opportunity, both the ones we already have and the ones that we can create, to explore how to bring more people into the conversation about climate change solutions.
Allow us to share a story of our own awakening about communicating climate change and our own struggles and unanswered questions on the path of evolution that we've taken on this little quest.
So this is a photograph taken at the same week-long workshop that Marilyn was at, and Gail too. Do you remember that? It was on ecology and sustainability in 2004. That's me on one side and Mark on the other. Mark gave a presentation at the workshop, presenting a project that he had applied integral theory to. And because it was very close to what I was working on in my town, I was the town conservation commission chairperson, and I wasn't really getting too far. I was having kind of, I used to get burnt at the stake in the town square, it was bad. I volunteered to be in his breakout workshop to see what I could learn.
At the time, I was working on a conservation and development plan for this rapidly growing creek valley in our area. It was about 25 miles long. And the II workshop asked us how could we integrally communicate to the various stakeholders and the residents that were affected by the project. And we were competing with some other teams. This is just one of the examples from that project that we call the Green Infrastructure Plan. And we started out the workshop by outlining what we needed to do. And the charge was to communicate to everyone in our potential audience, which in integral terms meant to create messages from the perspectives of the good, the true, and the beautiful, Wilbur's Big Three. And also to try to target as many developmental levels as we could. And at the time, the workshop and we were all using the classic spiral dynamics colors for the values levels.
Yeah, this was 2004. So here's the brochure concept that we developed. I'll have to admit that when we started, and I think, Marilyn, you were in that workshop with us, I was completely lost, but Mark was extremely clear where we were headed. And the brochure was based on the voices from these different cosmic addresses and what each might say in the future, after the project had been completed. Well, our team won this competition, the prize for which was a call with Ken. And so Mark and I began working on the agenda once we left the workshop. At the time, he was in Tennessee and I was still back in Massachusetts. It was to be a 1-hour call, but it turned into 2. Ken loved it, and we were all completely thrilled. So this was how our relationship began. It began in earnest back in the spring of 2005, and then we married in 2009. But from the very start, from that 2004 workshop, we continued to work on a number of projects, most importantly, the book, Integral Sustainable Design.
And this was the first book to apply integral theory to architecture. And of course, we used the 4 quadrants, which we call the perspectives of experiences, behaviors, systems, and cultures, 4 different fundamental views about sustainable design and about buildings in particular. And we also developed 4 levels in each quadrant, unfolding into 16 different prospects or viewpoints from 16 different cosmic addresses, all on the subject of sustainable design.
And when the book came out, Ken called Mark and they talked for a few hours. Ken really liked it a lot. And we had a good response to the book. And because of it, Mark began to be invited to deliver even more keynotes, to work with faculty of other universities, and to suggest ways of teaching architecture that could embody this integral approach. And I was working with him. I worked with people on developing talks. So I helped him create these talks. And before we knew it, we were thinking, why don't we find a way to deliver these as a duo? So that's what you're subject to right now. We both wanted our speaking to be about climate change, something that we both felt is an urgent issue.
Instead of constantly complaining about climate change, we decided to challenge ourselves and to accept an invitation from Al Gore to come to Chicago and be trained as climate reality leaders. So we went up for a 2-day training on very short notice.
And after the training, we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out who was our audience going to be. But soon, because of Mark's work with his other book, Sun, Wind, and Light, which applies, all sorts of sustainable strategies to preliminary design, we were invited to the American University in Beirut for 3 days of workshops, followed by a keynote address. So we knew this was our opportunity. This was, after all, the perfect audience for us. Mark, with his work on sustainable design, combined with an integral approach, fueled by our passion for the urgency of climate change, it led us to develop a presentation we call Solving the Climate Crisis by Design, which had as its intention to inspire architects about the actual opportunity the climate crisis is for them to make a difference.
So, following Gore's example and his recommendations, we showed much of the bad news that was associated with rising temperatures, and all the while knowing that we'd follow that up with some good news and some architectural solutions. And we thought that logically introducing the bad news science, or what Gore calls the reality of climate change, would provide the why for what we were suggesting architecturally. So
just what Otto said we shouldn't do.
We're going to take you through this because it's interesting. And so here's the kind of overview, a summary of the approach that we were taking. And it started like this: architects pollute. This was the cover of a well-respected architecture magazine. It came out in about 2013, I think, and it stunned the profession when it hit the newsstand, back when people bought magazines off newsstands. We gave them statistics about climate change and buildings, and the fact that buildings are responsible in the U.S. for almost 50% of energy use, which is equal to transportation and industry combined. Just amazing. And then to drive it home, we started with a bang like this: the energy trapped by man-made global warming pollution is now equivalent to exploding 400,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs per day, 365 days a year. And then if you imagine this really, really loud in a big auditorium.
It was quite loud.
It's a big planet, but that's a lot of energy, especially 400,000 times a day, which works out to about 4 atomic bombs worth of heat per second that we're trapping in the atmosphere.
So then we show the extent of extreme weather events, more extreme temperatures, fires, droughts, floods, mudslides, storms. We really gave it to them. All this is much worse now. These are old figures. And then we talked about, how the rising temperatures prompted the spread of tropical diseases and expanded the habitats of vectors carrying those diseases. And who knows how much of what we're experiencing now with COVID is related to this. And then we talked about the effects of droughts. We just gave it to them.
Wherever we go, we like to bring it home. So we were talking in Lebanon, and this is a lake in Lebanon, which is just one symptom of a drought that the Middle East is experiencing. And it's the worst drought in 900 years.
And of course, the resulting flow of refugees like these from Syria.
And in addition, we include a lot of slides with statistics and graphs.
Lots of graphs.
And so like this one here, we start with 0 and we go back 800,000 years based on ice core data and so forth. And you can see CO2 concentration going up and down and never reaching more than 300 parts per million, and temperature tracking up and down along that through the centuries. And just a few years ago in 2013, reaching up to 400 parts per million, and that graph just keeps going up. And there's the track that we're on worldwide. Over the next 40 years, we could be in a bad situation.
So we showed them all these graphs, but we even showed a few slides to try to wrench the heart Of course, this is what we all look like now, so it was a much bigger impact then. But halfway through, and here's the point of all this bad news, we looked at the audience and they were in terror. We actually had to stop the presentation and cajole them into sticking with us. We promised it would get better, that we would give them some good news, some solutions. But what we had not taken into account is that, as you undoubtedly know, qualitative psychological research provides evidence that some people are deeply affected by feelings of loss and helplessness, frustration, due to their inability to feel like they're making any difference in stopping climate change. So as promised, we did follow with the good news, and we showed how buildings and architects could lead the way in reducing energy use in buildings. And it included a whole hierarchy of strategies for net zero design. We went pretty deep with this. We brought in the work that Mark has been doing for the past 25 years.
So we won't go into all those kinds of details, but it's the kind of thing that I teach every day about how to make high performance buildings using site-based energy of sun and wind and light. And this is one of the many strategies from the book of that name, Sun, Wind, and Light. And Susanne was actually the editor on that book also. We go through a lot of different strategies, and we do traditional, we do modern buildings, we do postmodern, and try to give as many solutions from different places that people can draw from. This, for example, would be a traditional solution from Charleston, South Carolina, which is a hot and humid climate that tries to stay cool. And it's integral in the sense that it goes across a wide range of scales, from the city plan down to the site plan to the building that you see here on the left, and then even down to the details.
And in our keynote in Beirut at the American University, we had a wonderful packed house of about 300 people who, after recovering during the good news section, generously received our message, loved it, and gave us a lovely standing ovation. But we also had them in shock due to the overwhelming bad news that we presented all at once.
And here's the kind of structure of that talk, where we go through the 4 quadrants, although we don't really talk explicitly and mention them as quadrants. But we take the perspective of the upper right, give them the bad news there, then the problems and the bad news of the lower right, the problems of the lower left, and so on. And by the time we got to the upper right, it was, they were falling out of their seats.
That's when they were in
holding
shock.
Their heads,
Yeah.
right? So, and then recovering from that, we go through all the solutions in the 4 quadrants. So that was how we were thinking in our first talk. And here's a little tool that we use to go back and re-look at our work and figure out what's next. It's called Emergent Learning. It's from a consulting group called 4 Quadrant Partners. It's pretty simple. You look for the ground truth and start there about what you've done. You then out of that, look for the insights of what happened, what worked, what didn't work. Then generate some hypotheses about what you might do in the immediate future to upgrade the quality or the performance or however that might be working for you. And then look for opportunities to apply that in the work that's upcoming. So in a very simple sense, here's what we were looking at, which was we had a structure. We were looking at the 4 quadrants. It was all bad news in all 4 quadrants, and then all good news in those 4 quadrants.
The poor things.
Oops, let me go the right direction. And that we had was too much bad news really can shut people down if you don't give them some hope and relief in the process.
Shocking.
And so the opportunity that we saw was that we might be able to create a rhythm. What if we did good news, bad news in one quadrant, then good news, bad news in another quadrant, or the reverse, the bad news and then the good news, one at a time.
Yeah, so we really like this because it allows us to look at what we've done, how to improve it, and then to be ready for the next opportunity. And sure enough, another one arose, this time in Scotland.
And this was to be presented to a different type of audience. It was at the Edinburgh International Center for Spirituality and Peace. And the name of the conference was Spiritual and Integral Ecology, Perspectives on Art, Place, and Nature. So you can kind of get a sense of who that audience might have been. In Beirut, we avoided levels, hierarchy, spirituality. It didn't seem the right fit for the audience. But we figured in Scotland we might be addressing a more green and integral audience. And so it was our first time dealing with levels. We had only a shorter amount of time, 45 minutes. So we took the 4 quadrants and compressed them into the big 3 and added this new layer of healthy expressions. So we're going through the bad news, the good news by the big 3, but then ending up with what would people be saying from a traditional, a modern, and a postmodern perspective that was healthy.
And we called the talk The Good, the True, and the Beautiful of Climate Change. And the conference, as you saw, took place in a church downtown Edinburgh. So we took the opportunity to stress the spiritual nature of the planet, our dharma to protect it. I even took the opportunity to share my Shiva Drishti experience that I'd had, which landed really well with this group.
And we've also had some experience with some work with the Landmark Forum. And so Zaffron and Logan's book, The 3 Laws of Performance, we used to help generate the idea of the healthy expressions in that portion of the presentation. And those 3 laws are quite simple. They go like this. How people perform correlates to how situations occur to them. So perform could be taking action on climate change, for instance. How a situation occurs arises in language. And thirdly, future-based language transforms how situations occur to people.
So we started practicing and experimenting with how people at different levels, how they see it, how it occurs to them, how they speak about it, what the language they're using, and then how future-based expressions might be able to transform the way climate change occurs for them.
So, for example, we'll take the good first. So we had the bad news of the good and then the good news of the good. And then we generated some future-based healthy expressions from the perspective of the good, so lower left in quadrant language, at 3 levels of worldview.
So the traditional says we use the sun and wind on our lands so we can take care of what God gave us.
From a modern level, one might say we're managing our energy sources and environmental sinks to prosper now and in the future.
And then the postmodern, working to solve climate change and save the earth, has really brought our community together.
Sounds kind of green, right? So once again, we went back and looked at our emergent learning model. Our structure there was the big 3, bad news, good news, and healthy expressions in each of those 3 in sequence. Some insights. One, nobody got overwhelmed.
It was good. Yeah.
So that was a whole lot better. The rhythm worked. But we also had a mean green meme challenge, you might say. We were speaking as if we were speaking from the integral to the integral. And in doing so, we suggested that red and amber needed codes and rules and structures in order to be able to do the right thing. But we were also speaking to an audience which, as it turned out, was probably at least half kind of green dominant. And so the response was, what are you talking about? Who gets to make those rules? Isn't that just hierarchy taking over?
Oops, we should have seen that one coming. Ken warned us about this. So luckily, we were ready to address the mean green meme effectively. They were very upset, actually.
A little bit of drama.
Yeah, a little bit of drama there. Mark pointed out that these codes that he's talking about get generated in multi-stakeholder, consensus-based groups, and that seemed to work for them. So that was good.
Yeah. So once more, we learned to only speak integral to integral. If you're going to unpack the theory, you need an audience that's really primed and ready for that. And really to try to know the audience, to try to figure out who you're speaking to, and then be ready for some green.
So it was a good thing because our next talk, we got invited to Australia. We were going to be with architects and building construction professors. And this was in Geelong, Australia, at Deakin University, a beautiful spot right on the bay. And we were going to consult with their faculty on implementing integral into their research work. And we held 10 workshops culminating in a symposium in Melbourne.
So during the same time, we were invited to give a public lecture about climate change. And we look back at our last two talks, and we felt ready to, approach a wide audience. We had the public, architects, students, building contractors. And so we looked at a reworked version of what we did in Beirut. We kept the original title, and we delivered this new and improved version of what they call the real lectures. So we kept the 4-quadrant view in this lecture. Not explicit again, integral as a substructure, but we felt pretty confident that we were covering all the bases.
Right. So again, without revealing the integral theory, which Mark's learned this lesson with a few early audiences. When you start with explaining integral theory, people get very activated, sometimes bored, or they want to argue the philosophy. So we just say things like, Mark and I have been thinking about the climate crisis in 4 major ways. And we usually do start with this one, technological sustainability, because this is the way most people think of the climate crisis. But then we move into ecological, cultural, and experiential.
So we were back in our element, talking to architects and students mostly. And we knew we weren't speaking to a dominantly integral audience. So we decided it was probably too complicated in an hour to introduce a lot of levels in a significant way. But at the same time, we like to weave them in. So it's part of the conversation, part of the dialogue of how we're presenting things, so that the idea is that everyone in the room feels like they're being spoken to. And so instead of the good news, bad news, we described it as problems and solutions. So it's basically problem and solution in each quadrant, one at a time,
right,
back to the good rhythm that we learned in Scotland.
Right. And in the question and answer period that followed, a wonderful question emerged, which turned out to be our next challenge. They said, yes, we get it, and we love knowing that there are actions we can take as architects to counteract climate change. But what about those people who still think it's not real and don't understand the science? How, they asked, in a world where a US president can deny the reality of climate change, does one get clients and public officials to listen to what seem like obvious truths? Yes, we told them, we are in a particularly challenging world where truth and facts are all in question. And we started seriously on this next challenge because we knew we were going to come back to Tennessee and give the same talk or some version of it back at the university. And we knew that a large segment of the students are actually climate deniers.
But we also knew that our next audience was going to be a group of building scientists at a summer conference. And we started to look for what was it in the empirical world of research that could help us make sense of the disconnect. And we really sort of had to face that we're going to have to take on levels, even with a science-based audience. So we found that employing Keegan and Gilligan's work to talk about stages of cognitive and moral development made sense, and it made sense to the audience, especially given their academic and scientific-oriented approach. Much better than it had 6 years ago when I tried to address the same audience. So something had shifted either in me or in the world since then.
I know. Oh, yeah. What's that?
But as you can see here on the left, we simplified it really into rational, pre-rational, rational, and trans-rational. And we also like to give some diagrams, and this one is kind of self-explanatory. It's the idea that, if you're down there at a lower stage, at a lower level in the valley, on a terrace, your horizon is limited, and the further you move up, the more your horizon expands, the more comes into your world space.
As Mark started to explain this and put the graphic into our presentation, I actually had a personal transformation, a breakthrough regarding climate deniers. I'd been beating my head up against the wall since the 2004 workshop. Why don't they understand this data? Well, all any of us were giving them was graphs and statistics, some nice data, some sexy data, but graphs and statistics nonetheless. And I realized that my frustration was actually due to denying them their stage, making them wrong. And I began to get a little disappointed with myself for being so impatient and intolerant with their lack of understanding. I know that these are good people that I meet every day.
So we started to take a look at how climate change occurs from different cognitive stages. And particularly, we were interested in getting to know the pre-rational. So I've been meeting with this group of building scientists for many years. I mean, these are the people in architecture schools that teach about environmental issues, for instance. And so they have a very green motivation, if sometimes maybe an orange methodology. But their fundamental question almost seems to come back to, why doesn't anyone get it? In fact, they often refer to themselves as the Lone Rangers. Why does all my work in environmental architecture seem to fall on deaf ears? So the other context that we were working in is really the context of American politics today, in which we have mostly Democratic environmentalists that are pitted against mostly Republican climate deniers, and they're locked into these culture wars where no one seems to be able to hear each other.
Therefore, our intention for the talk was to communicate what our own breakthrough had been about why we are failing at this.
So we were in a lovely setting in Montana, and for this presentation, we dropped the quadrants altogether and used levels as a framework, because it seemed that the problem of communicating climate change to the pre-rational and even to the rational is really a developmental problem of language. And so we were addressing building scientists and saying, well, how are we all going to communicate this set of issues to folks that don't understand or don't care about science and maybe can't read a graph? So we looked at 4 levels, pre-rational, rational, late rational, post-rational, and looked at how does the climate change problem look from there? What are the solutions as seen from that point of view? And then what are some healthy future-based expressions that someone at that level might have to say? We'll take a look. We're just going to take you through this from a 10,000-foot view without all the details, just the outline of it. Or 10,000 meters, I should say.
Yeah.
And so if we start with the pre-rational, at the pre-rational stage, someone doesn't take in phenomenon that's described from a late rational cognitive stage. They can't see that. It doesn't exist on the horizon.
Right. There's no crisis in terms of, they can't see anything. They don't understand graphs and statistics, and formulas are completely meaningless.
What counts there is concrete experience, respect, maybe sometimes what respected authorities have to say, and especially what your group believes.
So we think that we thought about this a lot, and we thought, one way to reach the pre-rational is through a call to stewardship. Now, not that stewardship wouldn't be good at other levels, but definitely the pre-rational through a call to stewardship.
There's really a large segment of society, especially in the region where we live, that believe that God gives people a responsibility to manage creation. So we thought that might be something that could be leveraged.
So we took a stab at formulating some healthy expressions. Now we're just experimenting. We're just digging into our creative selves for this, of what different stages would say about the crisis. So the pre-rational would say clean air is healthy air. Healthy air means a healthy community.
Or they might say, we use the sun and wind on our land so we can be self-sufficient and take care of what God gave us.
Or, I'm glad to have my church and the law both guiding me on the right things to do about this carbon thing. Now notice that you probably don't have any issues with any of this stuff. All these values and these healthy expressions are already embedded in our own pre-rational level. This is all good. It's all good stuff. Now in the rational stage. And again, this is how most people think of the climate crisis in terms of resources and pollution and the impacts on ecology.
And the solution from the rational point of view is that we already know everything we need to do and everything we need to know. The sun and the wind provide more than enough energy to meet all of our needs. And, any physicist worth his salt can show you that on the back of a napkin.
Right. We have the tools, like the Ghostbusters said. So here are some healthy expressions of what the rational stage might say. Through efficient technologies, carbon dioxide levels continue to be reduced.
Or, it's all paid off for me now. My solar power system has increased my property's value.
Or, we're managing our energy sources and environmental sinks to prosper now and in the future.
So you can think of these as maybe orange level. So the rational stage in various developmental theories, right, it's a pretty big territory. So we looked at it early and a late. You can think about it as orange and green. And so from this late rational pluralistic green perspective, the problem is twofold, right? It's that the climate change on one hand is a crisis of ecological and social systems.
Yet it's also a crisis of meaning, a crisis emanating from our myths and the stories we use to tell ourselves about our worldview, our place in the universe.
So you can see right there, it's kind of have a lower right and a lower left expression.
The solutions at the late rational are totally green. On the objective side, they're about things like zero carbon development and ecological cities.
And then on the subjective side, the solution's more about creating new cultural stories, expressing values of later stage worldviews. We're up to reframing our ideas of nature, and then how are we going to relate to that idea of nature in the built environment?
Here are some things that the late rational, pluralistic, world-centered person might say. Climate change has made me realize that I'm part of the web of life. It matters what I do.
Government, industry, community, and nature are all working together to solve these complex, interconnected issues.
Working to solve climate change and save the Earth has brought our community together.
Kind of green. So we can also have the transrational, the teal, the integral, etc., where folks can see that life is developmental. And without judgment, one can notice that every stage is needed. No stage is final. We are where we are. And the problem then shows up as what each stage can't see, that climate change is not on everyone's horizon. And the solution then is to, like Otto was talking about a little bit today, get more people up to later stages, or redo education. Get more rational and post-rational thinkers, and more of those thinkers that can communicate to the pre-rational levels, which, at least in our part of the world here, is at least half the population.
Right. And then the Pope actually is a great example of leadership in this moral development. This kind of leadership can move the culture to new heights of understanding and action. He says, let us be protectors of creation, protectors of God's plan, inscribed in nature, protectors of one another and of the environment.
So you might notice there he's addressing at least three levels that we've been talking about here. He's practicing a multi-level messaging in a very compact space. Everybody has something they can hear in there and relate to.
So here's some other healthy expressions that transrational stage may say.
This is one that was popular at the workshop that we went to. Things are getting better, things are getting worse. They're both true.
Each level of development has something important to offer the climate crisis solution.
So here's some things that we've sort of some takeaways, some summaries, and these are in the paper, which we'll distribute to you all a little bit later if you haven't seen it, so you can read a little bit more detail about all of this. One of the things that we say is to inspire and often start with a why. We got this from the business consultant Simon Sinek, but I think it's true that everyone's looking for something where they can make a contribution. And if you can plug into what contribution can anyone make where they are, then they can get inspired.
Also, give something up on yourself, which I did quite a bit through this process. I mean, I really saw my mean green meme, and I saw I was bashing people over the head with the bad news. You know, I think that's important.
But we also like to have some vulnerability in making a presentation, give up. But giving something up means also telling people about your own mistakes and your own shortcomings and your own waking up in the process.
And presentation is a conscious practice.
We find that we have to reflect, we have to be aware while we're relating to a group. It's much harder in this mode because we can't actually see everyone in the room. But when you're in the room with folks, you can really feel the energy of what's happening. And you have to be able to, change course or adjust or ask them questions, those kinds of things.
Right. We had to save them from the bad news.
Yeah. Loving who's in the room. That's really one way to be conscious in the practice is really even the people that disagree with you, the people that may not be landing on all of the different levels and stages that are present. Just loving them all is a great way to, we like to say who you're being is at least as important as what you're saying.
Absolutely. And then too much bad news, as we saw, just activates a shadow, and it shows up as a very dark space in the room and shuts everything down. So people can't listen. They can only take in so much of that.
We need some hope also.
Right. And only speak integral to integral. That's yours.
Well, we have an integral audience here, so hopefully the integral layout makes some sense. But we have, I don't know about other people's experience, but we have discovered numerous times that using integral as a substructure and as a way to organize one's own thinking is really great, and people relate to the delivery of those ideas much more powerfully than if you try to explain sex ecology and spirituality or something like that.
That doesn't really work.
And then finally, a multi-level message is needed. In most rooms, in almost all audience, integral is not the dominant group in the room, not the dominant awareness. There is a wide range of worldviews. Even in, I would say in every one of my classrooms, I've got traditional thinkers, people that come off the farm. I've got, modern people modern thinkers that have made it through, high school and learned algebra. And I've got postmodern green in the room. And I got a few folks, ready to break into the integral territory. So they're always there all the time. So that multi-level messaging is what we're shooting for.
We like to open the room up to a gallery view. Yeah, hi. And find out what questions you might have.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So that was a very honest presentation of the evolution you went through, kind of getting rid of the quadrants and the need to be comprehensive and thorough and beyond reproach, and landing on the developmental perspective and attuning to the audience. The only thing I would emphasize right there is you're giving them a state experience that they can relate to. And in my work, working with physicians, I frequently need to drop into an orange or even a red level so that they don't become homophobic. I can't be too touchy-feely as a clinical psychologist. And once they're sure of that boundary, then we can move to a higher level. Now that's one-on-one. A group is a much more unwieldy thing. But I really like how you laid this out. This almost doesn't have anything to do with architecture. It's only
No, we just kind of wedged that in there.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Well, we talk a lot about architecture when we're giving.
I mean,
half of what we do is we talk about architecture.
Yeah.
Half of it's about climate change, more or less.
Yeah.
But for this audience, that wasn't the main thrust.
See, Tom, I'm glad you said that, because it's really why we decided, we waited a time after we were trained by Gore, because we couldn't quite do the kind of presentation he wanted us to do. We just didn't see ourselves doing it. And we thought, well, it just makes much more sense. We've both been working in the architectural field. Why don't we just show architects how this is important for them? And that's what took us off. But doing the training was actually important. It got us off the dime. It made us create an intention to do it. And that was very important for us. Thank you for that.
Yeah, if I can say one more is, even your point on, Susanne, when you make that call to leadership, it's not like the people at the rational or post-rational are going to have a allergic reaction to that.
Right.
So that if we pixie dust everyone,
exactly.
and it doesn't take that much. I mean, the beauty of the lowest stages is membership is relatively inexpensive.
Yes. And it's all embedded in us anyway. I mean, we can't argue with that. It's real for all of us. So we are really addressing, but look how long it took us to get to this. I mean, we'd given this presentation maybe 6 or 7 times. We didn't tell you about all of them, all right? But so it took us a while to get there. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Anyone else? Some questions? Marilyn.
Yeah, Mark and Susanne, yeah, I do remember that way back in 2004, I wasn't in that pillow pile there, but I do remember.
No, you weren't. I'm sorry.
I was part of the winning of that competition.
You were.
And then I've just admired your work so much since then. Thank you for sharing this journey. I can really relate to it. I'm always having to experiment with my different audiences. I live in Findhorn now, so there are a few integralists who always say, well, isn't that a terrible mean green meme place? I know it's not very fair at all. You have to come and live here. There's a lot more nuances to it.
Nice.
But what I was really curious about in your journeys and different audiences, did you find a difference in generations? Were there ways that younger generations, for instance, were maybe more open to the left-hand quadrants or to the post-modern levels? I'm just curious.
I mean, I personally found that they were more open to hope. The older people were a little more jaded about the possibility or the opportunity of actually doing something. But it did seem to me that the younger people were inspired. They were quite inspired. And we got a lot of feedback from them about, the fact that we had given them some tools or some ways of thinking that could empower them in the future.
And were they able to see that? I think one of the profound messages you give is you need to be a good translator. And so you have to translate into these different ways of making meaning. And did they see that as part of their hope, or were they more in one level?
Well, I don't know if we've gotten that far with them yet, have we?
Not with the students, not with the younger people. They do want some hope. They're very idealistic, and yet they see a very dark space that they're being born into and graduating into, and so forth. We have done some experiments that worked quite well with the building scientists, where we were asking them to help us to translate very scientific-oriented statements about climate change and CO2 and complex things like that into some language of the pre-rational. And they had some fun with that, and they really got it. They really got how, if you're just speaking, over people's heads, they think you're elitist, and that's a thing that comes up very frequently in political conversations around us these days.
Yeah, and that was the point of the talk that we did with them. And I have to say, we've been to these conferences every summer for years, and this was the liveliest conversation that we'd ever had, was when they started to grapple with this, and they saw this window for themselves. They saw that they didn't have to stay in a mean green meme, that they could break out. Yeah. And that was really wonderful for us, because that had been our intention in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
We've got a bunch of hands raised here. Let's go to Laura. Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. My graduate school research work was on using spiral dynamics and trying to come up with messages around climate change. So I'm super excited to see yours. They kind of resonate with mine, but they're all like self-generated, like you said. And I always had the idea that I wanted to bring groups together to kind of test them out. So I'm wondering, I'm working in my community on a citizens climate action plan right now through that lens and trying to put some of those messages in there. So I'm wondering if you have more that you'd be willing to share that people could use in other communities, more than what you just shared today, I guess.
Well, actually, we're going to invite some of you to generate some of those. That is the activity. We're going to lead you into a little space of creative, creating some healthy expressions by going into a kind of contemplative state. So I'm going to lead you in a little deep dive. And then James will put you into rooms, and you'll wind up with somebody, we don't know who, and we'll give you a little worksheet to fill in, along with a whole list. Thank you, Laura, for a list of the ones that we talked about today as a kind of,
If you contact us after the meeting, we can also send you what we wrote up about our green infrastructure plan and how that got communicated.
Yeah.
So that did become part of the report. Again, without the integral structure being forefronted, but instead just being voices from the community, actually. Or we mixed them in with voices from the community and things that we had generated that people might say in the future.
Yeah.
But then mix that with some real voices that people had said about the issues in the project.
Yeah.
The questions coming up in your talks, is that what you mean?
No. This was as a part of our planning, our green infrastructure planning process. We got lots of input from lots of different players in the community, citizens, scientists, government, business, and so forth. And so we had messages and quotes from all those people that we could mix in and structure using the same kind of a model. So yeah, we can send you that.
You're welcome to that. And also to whatever we generate here today.
Maybe what we should do is transition over to the exercise.
Okay, unless there are any other questions that are burning.
So I'm sending you all this Word document. It has 3 pages. The first page here is just a summary of what we talked about in the basic presentation. 4 different levels, the basic problem, the basic solution, and some examples that we generated that you heard about already. And here's the basic challenge that we have for you. So we're going to break you into groups of about 4. I'm not sure how many that will be, but the charge goes like this. So standing in a future in which climate change has been solved and looking back. So future-based language is very important, and this is what we mean. You're looking back as if. What are some healthy expressions about what happened? And such statements can come from any quadrant, right? And so we would ask you to just complete these and say, speaking from my pre-rational self, right? So it's coming from us, not from some other guy or woman, right? Those other folks, but from our own level, right? Identifying and tuning into that. Speaking from my pre-rational self, what would I say about climate change and what happened? And from my rational self, and so forth, right? And then if you would, in your groups, we would really appreciate it if you filled in the bottom here with who the participants are and how we might get in touch with you if you're interested, and you can see our contact information is there already. And then what we hope to do is to compile this and make a little report and then give that back to the community by the end of, before the end of the online conference.
Right, so we have about another half an hour to do all this. We figured we give you maybe 15 minutes in your group, and then we can come back and share for another 15 minutes. But before you go into your rooms, I'm going to ask you to follow some very simple instructions about getting into a contemplative state. All right, so James, when you're ready, let me know. And then I'm going to ring this little bell, James. And that means that's time for you to put them in the group. Okay?
Okay, great. We've got the Google Drive link in the chat, and we've got breakouts of 4 or 5 people each ready to go.
Wonderful. That's perfect. Okay. All right. So now let's get started on the next phase, which is to uncross your arms and legs. It's probably better if you are sitting up because you are going to be awakening into a room with other people. So rather than lying down, and just adjust your posture as if you're going to meditate, or open up the chest, little arch in the lower waist area and your back. And then when you're ready, you can close your eyes. And then just take your attention, all of your attention, as much as you can focus, all the way down in your feet. As if you've got eyes coming out of your bones and looking out, and just looking at where is there any contraction or holding in that part of your body. Now scan up through your calves, through your thighs, any place where you're holding or clenching, just really let that go. Go up into the pelvic region. Make sure your sit bones are nicely grounded. Relax that whole area. You can let your stomach out. Nobody's going to look and see whether it's poking or not. And now open up the chest. Let your arms straight down from your shoulders. Put your attention inside of your chest, up through your neck, up through the top of your head. Relax the jaw. Let there be a little space between the upper and lower rows of the teeth. Relax the root of your tongue. And then just watch your breath. It's not necessary to do anything in particular with it. Just let it breathe you. And then the next time a breath goes in, just count, however you count, how many beats that is. See if you can even out the out breath with that. And now on the next breath, see if that out breath can be a few beats longer than the in breath. Keep your in breath the same, longer on the out breath. All right, just let your breath return to normal. Soon, you're going to be awakening in your new room with your new team members. And you're going to be dropping into one of your selves. One of your selves that's already embedded there.
There we go.
Wow, okay, good. So I just wanted to invite you. Yesterday, we got this invitation from Al Gore. This is one of the things that we responded to. And lo and behold, they are now doing this online. We went through the 14-hour training, but they're giving it in a 9-day, very flexible format. And we've signed up to mentor people with this. We're really excited about this. So if you want to sign up, it's free. This is I think Mark put this in the chat.
I will.
Okay, he'll put this in the chat. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. There are people all over the world doing this for this 9-day period. I don't see the date here. It's like sometime in July.
It's in the summer, yeah.
Right. So it's sometime in July, and you sign up for free, and you get this 14-hour training, and then you get access to a lot of the tools and coaching and mentoring, all sorts of things that the Climate Reality Project provides. And they do amazing work. And this is one of the things that really jettisoned us into the thing that we enjoy the most right now. So I invite you to take a look at that. Okay.
Right. Should I ask a question then?
Yes.
Great. Well, hello. I'm a big fan of your work. I have your book next to my bedside table.
Oh, that one. Oh, thank you.
That's the second edition. There's a third edition now.
Architecture student in the house. So
Wonderful.
I was so happy to discover you, and it changed the course of how I'm doing things, because that first thing the only thing I found about integral and architecture was Peter Buchanan's article, and so when I found that, I just finished my part 1, and I took so many years out just to figure out how the world is working, what I want to do. Do I want to get back to a terrible, wheel of how universities work, and just, I was having a big think about it. And then I applied to the LSA, the London School of Architecture, where he teaches. And in my interview, they said, "So why do you want to study here?" And I said, "Well, because Peter Buchanan is here, and let me tell you, I'm so into integral and this and that." And that was a bad idea.
And they said, no.
Yeah.
My interviewee had no idea what I was speaking about. And he's like, "What is that?" And,
I think he was making trouble for them.
Yeah, I figured I would have just done better just speaking about my green stuff.
For those of you that don't know, Peter Buchanan is an architectural critic, and he wrote a whole series in a British magazine called the Architectural Review, and it was called The Big Rethink. And he used integral more or less as his framework, and also did a nice review of integral sustainable design. So did you have a question there?
Yes. So then I stopped your work and I went to CAT. So I'm doing my work, my sustainable architecture MArch. And I think my question is, so I've found where to study. I figured that bit out. But my question is about integral architecture practice. I mean, how does it look like? Does it exist? I kind of figured that I just do my own life, and maybe, it's just about me doing it and my own path, and maybe working 3 days a week and doing things that I like doing with a practice that I like. But I wondered what your vision was, because, working in normal offices was really not integral at all. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think there are places that are more or less, on the integral scale there, and that you have to create your life in the way that works for you. So, you can. I tried to give some examples in the book about different more integrally oriented practices, but there's just lots and lots of prospects you can take on it, right? And you're always going to be a change agent. So you may not find the perfect spot that fixes that immediately in your ideal scenario. Like me, I don't work in the ideal integral university. Right.
They think he's,
But
it's weird.
we try to have some influence in the places that we find ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could do your own office. Did you read Integral Sustainable Design yet? The 500-pager?
Not yet. No, not yet.
All right, well, it's a tome. But
you can start there. There may be some something that you find inspirational.
yeah, I would say just keep your feelers out, you know. The whole lot, you're so young, you know. Life is just a complete evolutionary process, obviously, you know. Just keep throwing yourself up against the wall and rearranging your molecules. You'll get there.
I have a,
you know, feel free to contact us offline if you want to, you know, think about the architecture future further.
I just have one quick recommendation for you. I work with architects, have for many years. Can you hear me, Lila?
Oh, excellent.
The most powerful thing you can probably do is identify one or more clients who have a project that you could work on and who will partner you. It's even more important to have your client be aligned with your worldview than it is to have your colleagues. Okay, so you might do that in somebody else's environment, or you could do it in your own environment. That's just a thought for you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of virtual offices now. People coming together from different parts of the world to create an office for a project. So that's another way you can think about it.
Actually, we're planning a symposium in the fall that focuses on integral architecture. It'll probably be online. I'll distribute that info, you know, through the Facebook group and so forth when the details emerge. So you should be able to maybe in that network with a bunch of other folks. We're going to try to pull together all the people from the design fields that have some interest in integral.
I had one question for you guys, if there's time for one more.
Sure,
Brian.
From your presentation, I was really interested in your experience with talking to people and the different kinds of, you know, resistance that came up. And I was wondering, because you said in there, only speak integral to integral. Are you thinking of that in terms of if you're a speaker at an event, or do you mean pretty much that's what you've discovered about talking with people? Because it would seem like the evangelization aspect is go talk to people who are not integral. And I have to admit that I've been doing what you guys have said doesn't work, which is sort of teaching the model or the models. And you're right.
Not working?
It's not working very. I mean, you know, it is and it isn't. But it's basically a recipe. My experience is like yours. It's a recipe for resistance, and for people to feel offended about, like you said, elitism. I was just curious, where have you come in on that? In terms of what do you just sort of speak integral to integral? Have your conversations be integrally informed, but not teaching anything, and then wait for opening? Like, do you ever teach the models? Do you ever talk about that with people?
I do. I do. Yeah. No, I mean, architecture itself is a fundamentally integral phenomenon where people are always having personal experiences. You know, it always lives in the empirical world, and gravity is still relevant. It always is occupied by people doing things that have a culture and an interpretation and a meaning to things, and they always fits into an urban system and an ecosystem. And so it's always there. All the four quadrants are always present all the time. And so I do try to work with students and I use the four quadrants as a way to generate design ideas.
Right.
And
their projects.
we lay that out in a very simple way without going into levels, line states, and types and everything else. But just to say, you know, hit the bases and think about these things, because architecture is a complex, integrated phenomenon, and you're responsible as an architect for all those things.
Yeah, we just did a course last fall. It was the first time we ever did it. We called it Interiority and Creativity, and we did like a meditation every single time and tried to get them really deeply into their creative selves. And then Mark would coach them through whatever project they had, and they were all in different years and had different projects. and take a project and look at it like what's here, what's here, what's here in the 4 quadrants. And every single one of those students had amazing breakthroughs in their final presentation, to the extent that some of their professors said, wow, this is the best work I've seen all day, or I've never seen you do this kind of work. So just with the 4 quadrants, without explaining the theory, but just saying, look, you have to look at the technological, you have to look at the ecological, you have to look at the cultural, you have to look at the experiential.
Right.
And he made them create an intention in each one of those quadrants. What's your intention in the technological? What's your intention in the experiential? And so when they went to share their projects, they were extremely articulate about what they were doing, and they could show, yeah, this was my intention and this is what I did. Nobody else in the school was doing that. So it was really quite powerful. But he doesn't really explain the theory.
So, I mean, I'm working with students that they're cognitively able to do integral, right? They're cognitively able to put the pieces together in complex ways, and they're working on problems that have 100 variables, right? And the question is, whether on the other lines they're ready to go there with the integral. And I've had a couple of students over 20 years that could actually go there and hang in the conversation, but not very a handful that could be in this conversation and make sense of it, for instance.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question about the process of the presentation?
Yeah.
So some of you know that I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in couples. And I noticed your presentation worked pretty seamlessly between the two of you. What is it about integral that informs the ability of an intimate couple to work together? Because you're hardly laid back personalities.
No, we're both kind of strong personalities. I'm glad you noticed that. No, we I don't know. I mean, we discovered kind of early on. I was a relationships coach for a long time, and then I also was a presentation coach for a long time. So what happened is that I started coaching him in his presentations, and they kept getting better and better. And that's when we thought, well, why don't we just do this together? It's so much fun. I mean, we were having fun working on the presentations, instead of it being a chore. We're like, oh, what presentation can we work on now? So we found an alignment there with things that we were enjoying together. And then that led to editing to the books, and, we're in lockdown now. We're lockdown lovers. That's it.
Well, usually when I would get ready to go to a conference, and she makes me practice 4 or 5 times before she allows me to get on the plane to go to the conference. And, at some point, usually she says, well, look, that's all wrong. Don't do it that way. And I'm like, I can't take it. I can't take it. She's like, I'll do it. And then she stands up and gives a talk. She goes, do it like this. And she then gives my presentation. I'm like, okay, that's how I do it.
All right, okay.
So we've been in it, doing it a long time. Suzanne's got really decades of training.
Yeah, I'm 72, so I've been doing this for 35 years.
Yeah,
so.
She's been a public speaker a long time.
But he's actually an introvert, but I would kind of keep bringing him out of his little shell, because I feel like he has so much to share. And he's been very courageous in this. And somehow when he gives a presentation, and especially in front of a room, he is just a dynamo. He's just a powerhouse. And so I just keep empowering that about him. I want him to win at that.
It's interesting. I think we should do the online talk standing up, though. Right?
Well, I thought about that.
A little more energy.
Yeah. Right? We're usually roaming around. I haven't sat down this much in ages.
I don't know if we have a specific answer for you, Tom.
What did you want to hear?
I'm married to another psychologist, so I know the challenge is sharing power.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. We don't compete with one another. There's no power issue. We never compete. So I'm completely into supporting and empowering him, as powerful as he can be. And he feels the same way about me. There's no competition. Yeah, that's kind of what works.
All right, well, I actually have to get ready to go to the 4 o'clock art opening, or 4 o'clock in my time zone.
You guys have been a great, fun,
thank you for hanging in there.
really fun group to be with. Thank you so much, really.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Good meeting you, Laura. Good meeting
That
you,
was
Gabby.
great. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks so
we'll
much.
see you in some more
soon.
sessions.
We'll probably see you in
Bye,
another
Valentina.
session.
Bye, everybody.
Tom and Laura.
Bye.